Hello and welcome to this edition of Nations and Generations. My name's Billy Mack Richard, and I'm glad you're here. Today we're going to be talking about when Titans fall. Thanks for hanging around. I think you'll find this very, very interesting today. One of the things before we get too far into this, please hit the subscribe button down below. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, and please comment. Questions, comments, concerns, let us know down in the description box below. Also, Facebook, you can find us there at Nations and Generations. You can also find us at nationsandgenerations.com. So please give us a like, give us a follow. Let's get into it. When Titans fall. There was a gentleman at one time. His name was George. This was many years ago. And George was around in the colonial days of the United States. And George was a preacher, and he preached the gospel predominantly all of his adult life. In fact, he had become somewhat friends with Benjamin Franklin. And in fact, you can even read writings of Benjamin Franklin. He spoke very highly of George. George was quite eloquent in the way that he presented things. George would spend a lot of his time going back and forth between the Old World and the New World. In fact, he made 13 crossings across the Atlantic. He spent more than 732 days at sea. In fact, it was said of the time, the only people who spent more time at sea than George was seamen. He would travel in those 13 trips some 70,000 miles, crossing back and forth between the two continents. On one of his trips to the Old World, he encountered a young man through this young man's relatives, and it planted some seeds in this young man. And this young man, those seeds began to grow in him. And in 1785, those seeds that were planted by George began to flourish in this young man, and he converted to Christianity. In 1780, he began a political career, and he was actually a native of Kingston over in Yorkshire, and he eventually became a member of the Parliament of Yorkshire. By the way, the gentleman who influenced him in a very early age was George Whitefield, and George was the one who did the traveling back and forth. So we see that we have a hand of the ministry of the Bible, of God, through a ministry, reaching into the life of a young man. Now, it took about 10 years, and that's fine because the young man had to grow up. But along the way, this young man lost his father and was forced to move in with his relatives, which is how he became to know George Whitefield. This young man, his name was William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce is an interesting young man. I've been doing a little look at the history of him and some of the things that he accomplished, and is absolutely phenomenal to see all that he accomplished. But I wanted to speak about something specifically in his accomplishments. In this journey that he was on, as a young man, being born again, he became very passionate about his Christianity, though he was never in the ministry. He was always, from a very young age, early 20s, in the political arena. And one of the things that he became extremely passionate about and emboldened over was the abolishment of slavery. And in fact, William had a young pastor that as a young man, and his pastor's name was John Newton. Now, some people may know who John Newton is, but what John Newton was a slave trader turned pastor. He had had an experience at sea where he lost his ship and had to be rescued. And in those times of life fleeting, not knowing what was going to happen, he made a deal with God. And he said that if God would spare him, that he, George Newton, wanted to become a Christian, and he wanted to become a minister. So it took John Newton quite a while to become a minister. He was rejected for 7 years, and finally he got to do that. And in 1772, John Newton pens probably one of the most famous songs ever written, and you and I know it by the name Amazing Grace. And what I want to point to at this particular moment in the story is the hand of providence, as colonial time ministers and people would talk, or you and I would say the hand of God showing us once again a model to save a nation and to change a nation. The necessity of cooperation between religion and government. It wasn't the fact alone that George Whitefield was preaching, or that John Newton was preaching and teaching and coming against this. It took the hand of government. Because, government is never our source as the church, but it certainly is our responsibility as the church. And we see, once again, this responsibility resting on the shoulders of the church, but we see a revival. At the same time, we see a reformation. And what began to happen in this is we actually see, it took a few years, but in 1807, Great Britain abolished slavery, soon followed by Germany and France, and even the United States not too far after that with the conflict in the Civil War. But all of this started because one young man got born again, got into government, and we see the support between. Now, don't misunderstand. Slavery at that time in Great Britain was huge. It was the sugar and slave trade. And it is equivalent then to what we have today in abortion. And I want to submit to you that I can see where Donald Trump would be the modern day William Wilberforce. He is the man that God has selected to put in there to be the tip of the spear, if you will. As we move forward, it takes cooperation between government and religion, and we need today to begin to stand behind Donald Trump and the cause of right. Now, don't misunderstand. We are not voting as a one-issue people today. This issue is foundational, however, because there's so many other things that are resting, and as news is beginning to come out, many of us are seeing these things. But we're beginning to see that is foundational. And you know what's amazing is this is not anything new. This has been around for thousands of years, whether it was the worship of Baal or of Moloch or whatever. They would take their babies and heat these idols up and throw them on these idols and cook them and sacrifice their babies. Same thing we've been doing for 61 million babies since this thing became law. We are now at a place where it is time. In fact, I think that we're at a place now where we are at a place it's got to be overturned. We have got to remove this scourge from our country. And again, like I said, there are fixed moral standards that God has put in place. And I know people go crazy when you start pointing that stuff out, but that's okay. You can just go crazy. These fixed moral standards cannot continue to be compromised. And we now are at a juncture, I think, where it is of necessity that this is stopped. God has put in, and don't misunderstand for a minute, Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing when he had nominated Judge Barrett to go to the Supreme Court. So I want to encourage you today, and I want to dare you to use your voice and your faith for more than just praising the God of creation, but use your voice and your faith to change the world. Understand, As the United States goes, so goes the nations. We stand in the gap, and God's given us the responsibility to shape nations, to bring about great restoration in the earth, and as we watch and work towards the return of Jesus. A great revival, a powerful reformation is at hand. We must vote, and vote life across the board. Have a wonderful day. Lord bless each and every one of you.